Revelation 13. I'm going to try to make this as complicated as possible. That's what you're going to think. That may be what you're going to think halfway through this. Is he making it as complicated as possible? I'm going to try to make it not as uncomplicated as possible, but I don't know if I'm going to succeed. Revelation 13. Like I said, just allergies. You cough nowadays, everybody freaks out, yeah. But like I said, when people think of Revelation, this is the type of chapter they think about. The beast coming out of the sea, the mark of the beast. Well, that's all in this chapter. We looked at chapter 12 last week, the woman which pictured Israel gave birth and she was attacked. You know, so we see these major chapters of the book of Revelation, and they're not always so straightforward, but we'll try our best. I'll try my best to explain this chapter, and we'll go through chapter to verse 10 this morning, and we'll pick it up this afternoon from verse 11 to the end of the chapter, verse 18. All right, so this chapter is about the beast. The beast is normally what people refer to him as the Antichrist. In Revelation, he's called the beast. So we see him come out of the east. No, comes out of the sea. Beast from the Middle East. It just rhymes, but. So the beast will come out of the sea, and then there's going to be a beast out of the earth. That's the false prophet. We'll look at him. We'll look at that part this afternoon. So the Antichrist, he's also called he's referred to by many different names, the son of perdition. We'll see some of the other names later on in the lesson. And this is not an ordinary man. He's called the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 11, verse 7, and chapter 17, verse 8. And ordinary men do not come from there. He is a human being, but he will be possessed by the devil. So the first thing we'll look at is the rise of the beast. Verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea. Of course, this is John. He's given a vision. And in his vision, he stands upon the sea, and he saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the Antichrist could easily be called the blasphemer, because that's what he does. He mostly speaks great things and speaks against God. And that's a lot of times what the devil does. The Bible says, refers to him as the accuser of the brethren. And that's what the devil does. You know, really the devil basically, how he attacks us is by using his words, by deceiving us, by accusing us. That's what he does. It's almost like if you could just shut him up, or he will be shut up one day. We looked at that already. After the 1,000-year millennial reign, he's going to be shut up once and for all during that time period. But if you and I could just not listen to him or listen to the Word of God. If we listen to the Word of God, that will be louder than his words, and then we'll be encouraged. But if we listen to the devil, we're going to be discouraged, and we are going to be defeated. But that's what he does. He speaks great things, and the Antichrist is going to be a blasphemer. He's going to speak out against Christ, and he's going to speak out against you and me, and he's going to attack, and that's how he primarily attacks, with his words. I mean, in the garden, what did he do? He came to Eve, and he said, hath God said? Then he said, ye shall not surely die. God doth know, if you eat of this fruit, then you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. See, you see how he works? That's why the Lord has given us his word. Because the word of God is quick and sharper and more powerful than any two-edged sword. So, the beast comes out of the sea. So in Revelation chapter 12, we've seen the dragon. The dragon in the book of Revelation is the devil. The beast is the Antichrist. And then there's the false prophet. So you have the satanic trinity, the dragon, the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. He's a fabricator, a duplicator, imitator. So you have the Holy Trinity, and then now you have the unholy Trinity. We seen the dragon last week. Now, there are some similarities, if you remember. In chapter 12, it says, "There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." So now you see in this chapter, in verse 1, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." So you see there's a lot of similarities. And that's because the devil is going to empower the Antichrist. That's where he's going to get his strength, his power from. So you see those similarities. In Revelation chapter 12, John's vision mainly had heaven in view. And we know that the devil is going to be confined to the earth, and he's going to be mad. So he had access to heaven where he could accuse us before God day and night. But then now he's going to be confined to the earth. And when he is confined to the earth, he's upset. Then you have also the demons that were chained up ever since the days of Noah, and they're going to be released out of the bottomless pit. And they're upset because they were chained up all these years. So that's going to be happening during the tribulation, and that's why Jesus refers to it as the Great Tribulation, where he says that there's never been a time period in this world where it's been this bad. This is the worst it's ever been during the tribulation, the Great Tribulation. And the Great Tribulation, really technically, that's the halfway point. So the tribulation period is 7 years, so halfway is the last 3.5 years. And the Bible will give that time period over and over and over again. It's 3.5 years. It'll also say 42 months. It will also say 1,260 days. And in a couple of places, it'll say 1,290 days. It'll include the setting up of the government when Jesus returns. It'll give an extra 30 days. But it's still the last half of the tribulation period. And then another time, it'll say a time, that's 1, times, and that's 2, that's plural, and half a time, half a year. That's 3.5 years. So you're going to see that. You'll see that in this chapter too, the last 3.5 year period. So the scene shifts from the heavens to the earth. And so now John is on the earth, and he sees this vision. He stands upon the sand of the sea, and he sees a beast rising up out of the sea. Now the sea is mysterious. The sea is a place where there's parts of it that we've never even been able to explore. There's a lot of the storms. They begin at sea, and so the sea is it pictures just a mysterious type of place, and it also typifies Gentile nations. So the beast or the Antichrist is going to come up out of the Gentile nations. That's why a lot of people believe that the Antichrist is going to be a Gentile. And there are some people that believe he is going to be Jewish because he's going to be a false Messiah. When you hear the word Antichrist, it can mean opposite of. That everything Jesus is, he's the opposite of. It can also be he's an imitator. And I believe he's going to be both. Ultimately, he's going to be everything against Jesus, but he's going to be an imitator, so he's going to present himself as a Messiah, but he will be the false Messiah. So the Jews are going to accept him as their Messiah. They're looking for their Messiah today. They're right now looking. They're looking for their Messiah. So all the Antichrist has to do is he has to be who they're looking for. They're looking for someone to bring about peace in the Middle East. They're looking for someone to build the temple. They're looking for someone to bring all the Jews back. And we looked at on, I believe it was last week, and also I took a Wednesday to go over this, that there's the Dome of the Rock, which people believe that that's where the temple was, and the holy place was built on that rock, but it's kind of a rough, if you look it up, you can see it. It's kind of a rough-looking rock. And then there's another little gazebo on the, well, if you're looking this way at the Temple Mount, it's on the north side. And it's a little gazebo-looking structure. It's real small, and it's built upon a rock also. That's the only two places where you have the original bedrock. And supposedly, when you read the Talmud and the Mishnah, that rock that they offered offerings and sacrifices on before the temple was built there, and then of course the temple was destroyed, and that was the place that marked out where the Holy of Holies was. Some say the Dome of the Rock, some say it's over here, but it's more of a flat level rock. And when you look at the Talmud and the Mishnah, it says that when the high priest offered the offerings and the sacrifices, he was aligned up with the eastern gate and the mountain. So everything lined up. And when I showed this, and I forgot to mention this, but when you look at that little, you can't hardly see it. It's so small, that little gazebo. It lines up with the eastern gate, not the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is off. So the Antichrist is probably going to be able to convince them this is the place it's supposed to be built, and you can build it side by side with the Dome of the Rock. And so then the Jews are going to be happy. He's going to convince the Arabs. They're going to be happy. They're going to be side by side. I mean, we're just saying this may be what happens. And so then he's going to bring about a peace. So that's the Antichrist. And they're going to accept him as a Messiah because he's able to do this, if that is how it's going to go down. So a lot of people, including myself, believes that we know there's going to be a temple during the tribulation period. And it could be that that temple doesn't get built until the Antichrist comes, because when he solves this, he's going to be like the hero. And I believe, believing in the pre-tribulation rapture, that we're going to be raptured before the tribulation, that'll happen after. And so when after we're raptured up, then the Antichrist is on the scene. He solves the Middle East problem, he gets them to build the temple, because there's going to be a temple during the tribulation period, because the Antichrist is going to go into that temple and he's going to desecrate it. He's going to sit at the seat of the temple, and he's going to make people worship him as God. It says that in the book of 1 Thessalonians. So we know that to be true, that there is a temple. We see that even in the book of Daniel, that there's going to be a tribulation temple. But it is not a temple ordained of God. Because right now, we are the temple. Our bodies are the temple. But the Antichrist, because there are people that don't believe that the Messiah has not come, he's going to convince them. So all that happens, that's going to happen leading up to the halfway point. But the halfway point is when he commits the abomination of desolation. He goes into the temple, and he makes a covenant with them, which begins the tribulation period, builds the temple and all of that. And then during the midway point, he's going to commit the abomination of desolation. That's the book of Daniel speaks of in Daniel 9. And Jesus alludes to it. He mentions it in Matthew 24. And he talks about when the abomination of desolation, as Daniel spoke of, happens, flee to the mountains. And they're going to go to, we talked about this, Petra, well-protected place. And that's probably where they're going to go. In fact, there's a lot of Christian businessmen that have paid a lot of money to put food and rations and Bibles and Christian material explaining everything. So when the Jews go there, they're going to see this. And we know there's going to be a lot of Jews that get saved. This could be maybe one of the things that God uses. Of course, there's also going to be the two witnesses that are going to start. When the Antichrist does that, at the midway point, you also have the two witnesses that we talked about, that may be Moses and Elijah, that are going to start. They're going to start witnessing during the halfway point of the tribulation too. And then also when that happens, they're going to be also killed, and they're going. We talked about that already. I don't want to rehash that. So at the halfway point, there's a lot of things going on, and that's when Jesus says, "Hey, when that happens, when you see the abomination of desolation, flee." I mean, if you are on a roof, don't even pack a bag. Don't get your makeup, your rollers, your workout gear, your pre-workout, whatever. Just flee to the mountains. And woe unto those that give suck in those days. For those that have nursing babies, it's going to be rough. And pray that it doesn't happen in the winter, because it's going to be hard to travel when it's cold. And also pray that that doesn't happen on the Sabbath day, because public transportation is closed down and everything's like it's like a ghost town in Israel for the most part. So all of that is referring to the midway point, and that's kind of what this chapter is focusing on. So the Antichrist, he rises up out of the sea, and he some people believe is going to be a Gentile. He may be, or he may be a Jew that comes out of Gentile nations, or he may be a Gentile that convinces them that he's a Jew. Because he's a liar, it's not going to be a big deal for him to lie about that, to convince them. And you got nowadays, what is real big? People do that DNA stuff. You know that, what is that called? Ancestry.com and all that, so you can know who you're related to. Well, the Jews got that. But what it does is it tells what tribe you're from. They can't tell all the tribes yet, but they can tell a few. I'm not sure how advanced they are at this point, but the one tribe that they know is the tribe of Judah. Because they know the Messiah comes from the tribe of Judah. And so all he has to do is say, yeah, look, my DNA. He can fabricate it. Who knows what he's going to do? But I believe they're going to accept him as their Messiah. So the Antichrist is not just opposite of, but can also be instead of. So instead of Christ, Antichrist. Instead of receiving Christ, they received Antichrist. By the way, if you don't receive Jesus Christ, you are opened up to the Antichrist. People think, I don't want to make a decision. That's a decision. I don't want to make a choice. That's a choice. I don't want to receive Jesus. Well, you open up yourself to. There's only two choices. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly at heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So the Antichrist, though we call him commonly Antichrist, the Bible gives him other names. He is the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Let's look at that real fast. Or real slow. Daniel chapter 7, the little horn. We won't look at all of these. Don't worry. Daniel chapter 7. We talked about this as the, just like the book of Joshua is prophetic about what happens during the tribulation period. And Joshua, who is an Old Testament name for Jesus, he leads them into the promised land. And of course, there were 10 nations there. And out of the 10 nations, there were 3 of them that were swallowed up by the leader that was, he typified or pictured the Antichrist. So there's 10 nations, but this one guy, forget his name. Remember his name? Forget his name. But he takes over 3 of the nations, and so there's only 7 because he took over 3. Well, the Antichrist is going to do the same thing. There's going to be 10 nations. He's going to take over 3 of them. So we'll look at actually Daniel chapter 7 and look at verse 3. And 4 great beasts come up from the sea. That's Gentile, right? We talked about the sea, Gentile nations. Diverse, one from another. The first was like a lion. That pictures Babylon with eagle's wings. And I beheld the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. It says eagle's wings. God humbled him, turned him into an animal. Remember that? And he was humbled, and he repented, and he got saved. If Nebuchadnezzar can get saved, anybody can get saved. And if I can get saved, anybody can get saved, right? God is here to save sinners. Behold, verse 5, another beast, a second like to a bear. That pictures the Medes and the Persian Empire, Medo-Persia. And it raised up itself on one side, because it was 2 Medes and the Persians, but one side was stronger. And it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh, as it conquered more at that time period than any other kingdom. After this, behold, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. This is Greece, Alexander the Great, and how he conquered so quickly at a young age. The beast had also 4 heads. This pictures the 4 generals that that the kingdom, that his kingdom went to, and dominion was given to it. So you see that these beasts picture the kingdoms, the Gentile world powers. Now, in the book of Daniel chapter 2, it's the same world powers, but it's pictured as a monument, as a statue, because that's the way man views himself when he views government. Babylon, the head of gold, and the chest and the arms were pictured the Medes and the Persians, and it was silver. And then the stomach area, the midsection, was brass, that pictures Greece. And then the legs were iron, and there was 2 legs because because Rome was divided between east and west. And then it has the 10 toes. So this statue, that's the way man views government, the Gentile world powers, is pictured in Daniel 7 as beasts, because that's the way God sees them. But they're the same ones. You have Rome, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. I mean, you have Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greece, and Rome. In chapter 2, chapter 2, same thing, from the top down. And it went from more valuable metal to less valuable, but from weaker to stronger, because the iron is stronger than gold, but gold is more valuable. So you see these 2 chapters that speak of Gentile dominance, Gentile world powers. And this chapter in chapter 17 is going to speak about it. So I'm hopefully can explain as best I can. So in chapter 7, it's talking about these world powers. And so verse 6, that's the leopard that pictures Greece, Alexander the Great. And in verse 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. So that pictures Rome, right? Dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. That's Rome. And it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns. So the 10 horns is the same as the 10 toes of the statue. And this is a revived Roman Empire. Now, this hasn't happened yet. The workings of it has already begun. So I'll hopefully confuse you more. Explain it more better. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. That's the Antichrist. Before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. Why? Because he had 10, he took over 3. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Blasphemy. Then verse 9, this is going to take you all the way to the end. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, that's the Lord, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. Of course, this takes you all the way to Judgment Day. But now in the statue, if you remember the 10 toes, it was a mixture of iron and miry clay. It was not as strong as iron because it had miry clay. And then there's going to come a stone that was made without hands is going to hit the statue. It's going to crush it, and it is going to crumble, and it's going to turn to dust, and it's going to be blown away. And then that stone is going to grow into an exceeding high mountain, and that's the everlasting kingdom where it will never end. So you see the statue and the beast represents Gentile world powers. Now, when was the last Gentile world power? Rome. And so when is going to be the next world power? Because after Rome, even though the United States is a powerful country, we're not a world power in that sense. We're not trying to conquer the world. But there's going to come another world power. that is going to be a revived Roman Empire headed up by the Antichrist. And then his empire is going to be defeated by Jesus Christ at the end of the Battle of Armageddon, and it will be no more. And then Jesus will come down, and that temple will be removed. It wasn't an ordained temple. He's going to build the millennial temple that talks about in Ezekiel chapter 40. And we'll come back with him at the end of the Battle of Armageddon, where we will rule and reign with him for the 1,000-year period that the Bible talks about. I believe it's a literal 1,000 years in Revelation chapter 20, where the devil is going to be, he's going to be chained up in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, and the beast and the false prophet will be sent to the lake of fire. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, if you don't believe it's a literal 1,000 years, then what does it mean that the devil is chained up for 1,000 years and he's going to be released after the 1,000 years? And then he's going to be allowed to tempt people again, and some people are going to follow the devil. And then he is going to be, after that, there's going to be the last and final judgment. He's going to be sent to the lake of fire, where the Bible says the beast and the false prophet still are there. Now, if hell consumed people and annihilated them, which is what some people believe, then how is it that the beast and the false prophet, who are human beings, are sent to hell at the beginning of a 1,000-year millennial reign, and at the end the devil is sent to hell, where the Bible says where the beast and the false prophet still are, still there? If you don't believe this, read Revelation chapter 19 and 20. It's easy to see it there. Okay, so he is known as so you see the little horn, right? You see him there in Daniel chapter 7. Now, he's also the king of the fierce countenance of Daniel chapter 8. He is also the prince that shall come of Daniel chapter 9. He is the willful king of Daniel chapter 11. In fact, in Daniel chapter 9, well, it's going to, if we look at all of these, it's going to take us past lunch. Unless are you guys hungry? No. So we see that all of these are references to the Antichrist. He is also the one who comes in his own name. Jesus said, "I come in my Father's name, you don't receive me. Someone is going to come in their own name, him you will receive." That's the Antichrist. By the way, like I said, if you don't receive Jesus Christ, you're going to be vulnerable and opened up to receive the Antichrist. And the Jews right now have rejected Jesus Christ as their Messiah. Many Jews, not all Jews obviously, but there are men, for the most part, the nation of Israel, those that are Orthodox Jews or ultra-Orthodox Jews, they're going to be opened up to receiving the Antichrist as their Messiah. There are in the church, Jew and Gentiles, there's many Jews that have received Jesus Christ as their Messiah. But the nation of Israel as a whole, many are atheist, agnostic, and then there are a lot that are very religious, but they're religiously lost. He is also known as the son of perdition, the man of sin, the lawless one, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. Now, keep in mind, since the devil does not know when Jesus is coming back, he doesn't know God's time frame. Jesus told us to be ready, right? So when he said that, the devil took note. Oh, I need to be ready too. And so he has potentially an Antichrist ready all the time. So people say, hey, I wonder if so-and-so is Antichrist. Well, there's always a potential Antichrist, but he's not going to become the beast until he's possessed by the devil. So there's always a potential Antichrist ready to go. In fact, it seems like, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it seems like every president that we have since I don't know how many people have said was the Antichrist. I've heard people say that Trump was the Antichrist. I heard people say that Obama was the Antichrist. I heard people say that Bush was I'm sure you did too. There's a lot of people that, I don't know, I mean, maybe people think I'm not, There's so many different potential Antichrists out there. But it says this, 1 John 2:18, little children, it is the last time, and as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists. whereby we know that it is the last time. 1 John 2:22. Who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, that denieth the Father and the Son. 1 John 4:3. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. 2 John verse 7. For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. Those that do not believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah is open up to receiving the Antichrist as the Messiah. Okay, so it says that he has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. There's something different about the beast compared to the dragon of Revelation chapter 12, verse 3, that had 7 crowns on his head. The 7 crowns of the dragon spoke of his strength and power, because 7 is a number associated with strength and completeness. But the 10 crowns of the beast express his rule over a group of 10 nations. Keep that in mind. Now, the 7 heads are 7 mountains. And a nickname for Rome is it is the city that is built on 7 hills. That is Rome. So we see the location of this empire is Rome. So now for that, we got to go to Revelation chapter 17. But I have it right here in your notes, so you can just look at that. Revelation 17. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her. We talked about this, that in the Bible, a woman or women in that sense can represent empires, even Israel. So we see that the woman represented Israel in chapter 12. So this is typifying or representing an empire. And the beast that carrieth her, which hath 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder. Signs and wonders. He's going to do miracles. He's even going to rise from the dead. Because if he is an imitator, then he is going to do what Jesus did. If someone is going to disprove Christianity, what do they have to do? They have to disprove the resurrection. That's what you're going to have to attack. And that's going to be very hard to do. If you're honest, it's going to be impossible. There have been skeptics. There have been people that have tried to disprove the resurrection that have become Christians. If you've ever seen the movie or read the book, A Case for Christ. It's even on Netflix. It's a great movie. It's a great book. There's also one that's called A Case for Faith that he wrote. Very great book. But the Antichrist, so he's going to have to do something to get people's attention. So there's going to be some people believe he's going to fabricate the resurrection, or some people believe that he really is going to rise from the dead. I don't know. But people are going to think that he did, and he is going to become very popular, even more popular and powerful than ever when he does that. So anyway, back to Revelation 17 in the notes. So they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. By the way, make sure that your name is written in the book of life. If you've never been saved, your name is not in the book of life. And if you are saved, your name is written in the book of life. Revelation 20, verse 14 and 15 says, And death and hell was cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. First death is physical death. Second death, spiritual death. And whosoever name was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Revelation 21:7, it talks about all those that are going to be in heaven. In Revelation 21:7 says, only those whose name are written in the Lamb's book of life. Make sure your name is in that book of life. You say, how do I know? Have you been saved? If you're saved, your name is written in there. And God doesn't write your name in there with erasable ink. Remember when you was in school and they had the pen that had the eraser? You're like, wow, we can erase now. You don't even have those anymore, yeah? You could write, you have that kind, and you write that with ink, and you didn't even need the white out. You could just erase them like an eraser. God doesn't write He writes with permanent ink. Whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. And they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. That speaks of a resurrection. Because it says that about Jesus, right? When we studied the churches, it talked about Jesus in that same way because he rose from the dead. And the Antichrist is going to fabricate a resurrection, or he's going to duplicate it, and I don't know how that's going to work, but that's what it's saying here. Okay, in verse 9 of Revelation 7 in the notes, it says, and here is the mind which hath wisdom. He's saying this. He says, you got to understand something here. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. So what is that? What is the place that's built on 7 hills? Rome. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So the woman that represents an empire, which represents Rome, because it's on the 7 mountains. Verse 10. And there are 7 kings. These are world powers. 5 are fallen. You want me to read you the 5? Anybody know who's the 5 that have fallen? It's on the next page, right at the top. No. Egypt, Assyria. Then when the vision of Daniel begins, it's Babylon, Persia, and Greece. They've already fallen. Now in John's day, who was the world power? Rome. And one is. That's Rome. So look back at, what's that, in verse 11, back in Revelation 17. I'm sorry, yeah, verse 11. No, verse 10. 7 kings, 5 are fallen. One is, that's Rome. And then Rome is gonna fall. And then the other is not yet, because it hasn't happened in John's day. It's going to be in the future. That's going to be the revived Roman Empire. The other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And verse 11, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. So you got the revived Roman Empire, and then you got the little horn that's going to take over 3 of them. He's going to be a world dictator, a world ruler. He is of the 8th. That's the Antichrist. He's of the 8th. And is of the 7, because he came out of that revived Roman Empire. He took over the 3 nations. So he's of the 7, but he is the 8th, and goeth into perdition. That's hell. Verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. The beast is the one that rules over them. So do you see what's happening? That in the future there's going to be a revived Roman Empire. Okay, now prophecy is always centered around Israel. Israel ceased to be a nation in AD 70 or 70 AD when Titus Vespasian, the Roman emperor, and his son, who was the general, they attacked Israel, or the nation of Israel, and the Israelites fought hard, but they lost. And they destroyed the temple. One of the soldiers threw a torch into the temple and burned it, and there was a fire, and then the gold started melting and leaking out. So they went after the gold, and so they just started tearing it apart to try to get to the gold. And because gold was about, I don't know, how much is it worth now? It was worth a lot back then, but not as much as today. but it was still worth a lot. So they went after, they tore, so that not one stone was left upon another, as Jesus prophesied. And then they leveled the temple, and they leveled the city of Jerusalem to the ground. And the Jews were persecuted. Many were killed. Over a million were killed. And then they were dispersed all throughout the world to every known nation. I think, in fact, today's standings of nations, they were in every nation except just a handful. Because, some nations that the borders change and, this and that. But for the most part, they were dispersed all over the world. And as of recent, they've been coming back home. But the nation of Israel stopped being a nation in 70 A.D. So what happens to prophecy? The prophecy clock stops. When is the prophecy clock going to start again? So from that time, there has been other people that... So Rome ceased to exist in... Oh, man, did I have that date? 476 A.D., where the nation or the Roman Empire collapsed. And it was no longer an empire any longer. And you have had people like Charlemagne, Napoleon, Hitler, and different people on the scene to try to rise it up. Do you remember the nursery rhyme? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. That's based on the Roman Empire. It had fallen, and it could not get back. It could not rise up again. So the Roman Empire, the last world power, ceased to exist in 476 A.D. The prophetic clock stopped. When do you think the prophetic clock started back up? 1948. Why? Because Israel became a nation again. So guess what else started back up? Who will get chicken skin? Guess what else started back up? 1948. In-N-Out Burger was started. 1948. Yeah. It's good, that place. The computer age began in 1948 too. There are so many things that started in 1948, or important things. The revived Roman Empire started in 1948. Israel became a nation in 1948, and the European Union began in 1948. Same year. The revived Rome began as an economic union in 1948, as a European common market with the same nations that began the old Roman Empire. Western European Union, the Brussels Treaty was signed on March 17, 1948 by Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. The European Economic Community, the EEC, was a regional organization that aimed to bring about the economic integration among its member states. It was created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Upon the formation of the European Union in 1993, the EEC was incorporated into the EU, the European Union, and renamed the European Community. So this is all the same thing. Today, there are 27, I believe. There was 28. And then the United Kingdom, they got out. So people say, well, I thought there's only supposed to be 10. Well, who knows what's going to happen, but if you look at this chart, and it's on the next page, those are all the nations that are a part of the European Union today. But there's only 10 nations that are full members and have voting rights, only 10. I don't know how it's all going to work, but there's going to be at the time when it's all going to happen. And if it happened today, there's only 10 that actually are full members because they're also part of NATO. And so they have a vote. Have voting rights. So how it's all going to work, I don't know. People say when the United Kingdom, when they pulled out, oh, look, it's not. We don't know what's going to. We know that there's going to be a revived Roman Empire with 10 nations at one point We'll be raptured. Who knows what happens after that? And then there's going to be 10 nations, and the Antichrist is going to take over 3 of them as the little horn. And he speaks blasphemous things. In fact, it says in our text in Revelation 13, we already seen the fact that he was blasphemous. It says, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. That's the Antichrist. He's the blasphemous one. So back to our text in Revelation 13, because I know we were in Revelation 17. Well, we were at least in the notes. So upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And as we looked at Daniel 7, says that he shall speak great words against the Most High. Yeah, because he's blasphemous. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. I guess we could call those mandates. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of times. So what does that mean? A time and times and the dividing of time. Time, 1, times 2, dividing of time, half. That's 3.5 years. So that's going to be the same time frame as we see in this chapter, 3.5 years. As we said that a lot. Okay, now in verse 2, it says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. Who's that? Greece. And his feet were as the feet of a bear. Who's that? Medo-Persia. And his mouth as the mouth of a lion. Who's that? Babylon. Now, isn't that what we seen in Daniel 7? But you saw it in reverse order, right? First it saw the lion, and then the bear, and then the leopard, and then Rome, right? Well, John sees it the other way around, because Daniel was looking into the future. John is looking in the past. In the day of John, Rome was a world power. And in the past, Greece was the last one before Rome, and then was Medo-Persia, and then it was Babylon. You see how he's looking that way. But it's the same thing. In this world power in John's day, it had the attributes of all these other world powers too. And it says, and the dragon gave his power. Who's the dragon? That's Satan. And his seat and great authority. So he got his power from the devil. By the way, Gentile government and world powers is backed by the devil. Don't kid yourself. Government's not going to save us. It's going to attack us, okay? Ultimately, that's what's going to happen. We see previews of that now. You know, when you look even at the news of our day, that the church has been attacked more than anything else. There were times where they were letting Planned Parenthood open, and they were letting certain other places open, and churches were closed. And there are people, pastor friends of mine, that were forced to be closed, or they had to pay tremendous fines. And some of them stayed open, and they paid the fine. And it was thousands and thousands of dollars. They went to court and won, but still, during this time period, there were a lot of Christians that were attacked. Christianity, don't kid yourself. Government ultimately is not our friend. When we see what's going to happen with governments, we see it's backed by the devil ultimately. Now, I'm not trying to say we should rise up. Daniel didn't do that when he was in Babylon. He was a good citizen, and he prayed, and he was light and salt in the community. That's what we need to be. We need to be good citizens. We need to be light and salt. We're not of this world anyway. We're of another world. This world is not our home. We're just passing through. And so we need to be a good representative of the Lord Jesus Christ and point people to him. And you're not going to really do that if you have a bad attitude all the time. It's not going to sell well. But we need to understand, though, that behind a lot of this is basically the devil. We see that in the book of Daniel. We see that in the book of Revelation. We see ultimately that these Gentile world powers, their power it came from the dragon, the devil. The Gentile world powers. That's why the last beast that represented Rome was a hideous beast. Because the Antichrist is going to be over it. So world leader is really empowered and supported by Satan. And through this man, Satan will express his own desire and authority. In this, the beast takes the offer that Jesus refused. Remember, the devil offered Jesus the kingdoms of this world. He said, just bow down and worship me. And he said, no, I only worship God. Well, the devil always wanted to be worshiped, right? He wanted that from the beginning. Isaiah 14, he wanted to exalt himself above the heights of the clouds. He said, I will be like the Most High. And he offered that to Eve. He said, if you eat of this fruit, you'll be as gods, knowing good and evil. You be your own God. Don't let God tell you what to do. You do what you want to do. And that's kind of can be how we think sometimes. I just want to do what I want to do. And we don't like authority. And the Bible says, obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves. And that's how we need to be. We need to be submissive people. And submissive to the Lord ultimately, and then those that he placed over us. So that's verse 1 and 2. We see the rise of the beast. Now we see the resurrection of the beast in verse 3 and 4. The pace gets picked up, so relax, okay. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. That's a mortal wound. And his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. So one of his heads were mortally wounded. He's going to be, this could be an assassination. He could be wounded. You know, the Bible talks about this in Zechariah, where the Antichrist is also, a lot of people will say that this is a mention of the Antichrist in Zechariah 11:17. He's called the idle shepherd. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. So this could be because of the assassination attempt that he's wounded, mortally wounded. He dies, but he gets raised from the dead. But you still see the wound in his eye and on his arm, his right arm, where he can't move, is paralyzed. And in his eye, he's blinded. Some people believe that's going to be his wound. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 14 and 15 says, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. People say that there are aliens. How you know there's aliens? Well, I saw one. I thought I saw a UFO, an unidentified flying object. Well, it was a UFO. It was unidentified. I didn't know what it was. But I don't believe in aliens. But I do believe in demons. So if you see something weird, it's a demon. It's not a ghost. It's not your ancestor of the past. And the devil can, I mean, if people want to see things, he can show people things. That does not mean that there are aliens and all this other kind of stuff. Anyway. But the devil can be transformed into an angel of light. I saw an angel. He was telling me something that's contrary to the word of God. I said, well, how do you know that was an angel of God? It could be a fallen angel because, well, it looked so godly. Well, the devil can, he can appear as an angel of light. It says this in the scriptures. So his deadly wound was healed. And verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. So the dragon, the devil, gave power to the Antichrist. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Wow, this guy is awesome. I mean, he rose from the dead. I mean, he's the one that built the temple. He's the one that brought peace to the Middle East. I mean, this guy is awesome. And he's powerful. Then it's going to be, who is able to make a war with him? You don't want to mess with the beast. So what is he going to do? He's going to attack God's people. So they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and as people worship the beast and bow down before his government, it may be that they do not know that they are bowing down to Satan himself. But it is worship of Satan nonetheless. They clearly worship both the beast and the dragon, but their worship of the dragon may be unknowing. They may not be doing it on purpose. By the way, when you worship, when we worship idols or false gods, even if you don't know that they are that, it's still that. Ignorance is not an excuse. Just like ignorance is not an excuse for breaking the law, right? So here they don't realize they're worshiping the devil, but they still really are, because he's the one that's backing up the beast. Okay, and the last thing. So we see the rise of the beast, the resurrection of the beast, now the reproach of the beast. And he's going to go after God's people. Verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things. We've seen that in Daniel chapter 7, right? We've seen that in the first verse of the text, that he's going to be a blasphemer. A mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. How long is that? 3.5 years, which lines up with Daniel chapter 7 too, right? And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And of course, he's going to commit the abomination of desolation in the halfway point. And he's going to, from that point on, he's going to start blaspheming God, blaspheming the temple. I mean, he made a covenant with the Jews at the beginning of the tribulation period. That's what kicks off the tribulation period. Halfway through, he's blaspheming God and the temple and those that dwell therein and God's people. So he blasphemed God, his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. So the blasphemer may be a more accurate title than Antichrist. And Daniel 7:8, we read that, but you can see that it matches up there. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Some people that believe in a mid-tribulation rapture will say, you see that he was making war with the saints. But the term saints does not necessarily mean that that the church only. So saints is anybody who receives Christ who's a believer, not just those that were part of the church age. So you can't say that because it says that there's saints here that the church is still here. You don't see the word church after chapter 3 of Revelation, right? Chapter 4, verse 1 is the rapture, what we were saying. You don't see the word church anymore. Not here. This is not church. There are saints. There are believers. We know there's going to be people who get saved during the tribulation period. But it says, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. But we know that Jesus said in Matthew 16, verse 18, he said to Peter, upon this rock, Peter, I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church, and yet it's being overcome here. Why? Because the church is gone already. And he's going to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Verse 8, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So this is all according to God's plan. In Titus 1:2 says, in hope of eternal life, that God, which cannot lie, hath promised before the world began. So the Lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world, in God's mind, because he's over time. He's past, present, future. He's Yahweh. He's God of the past, God of the present, God of the future. And that the Lamb was slain before the foundations of the world, before even all happened. God knows everything what's going to happen, and Jesus already in his mind had already paid the price for those in the future. Of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And verse 9, if any man have an ear, let him hear. Remember how it said it before when the church, chapter 2 and 3 is about the churches, right? Didn't it say, if any man have an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches? It doesn't say that now. The most it's going to say is, if any man have an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith. But it's not going to say to the, you won't even see the word church any longer from chapter 4 to the rest of Revelation. But you'll see the church come back in chapter 19 with Jesus at the end of the Battle of Armageddon. Where were we? Up here. We were in heaven in the throne room. Remember when John was caught up? Then you had the judgment seat of Christ, marriage supper of the Lamb. Then we return. I'd rather be up here than down here. Make sure you're saved. And make sure your relatives and loved ones and neighbors and friends and even enemies, make sure they're safe so they can be up here too. If any man have an ear, let him hear. Verse 10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. Those that are on the side of the beast, God is in control and God is sovereign, but people have a choice. And if they're going to side and they're going to be on the beast side, if they're going to take the mark of the beast, that's it. They have no choice, no chance. No chance after that. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. You reap what you sow. Here's the patience and the faith of the saints. So, those that are saints, those that are believers at that time, gotta just endure. You can't take the mark. And they're gonna be attacked. They're gonna be killed with the sword. They're gonna be decapitated. But they gotta just be faithful. So for those that don't get saved before the rapture, God forbid if there be anyone in here that's not saved. If the rapture happens and you're left behind, don't take the mark. And that's the next part of this chapter. We're going to see the false prophet and the mark of the beast. So we'll look at that after lunch. Would you bow your head and close?